we asked people what determined their current satisfaction level in their current position. So the highest response rate was compensation. So 57% of people said compensation was what determined their satisfaction with their current position. But the overwhelming response for what would make people seek a new opportunity was advancement opportunities. So that was 76%, and compensation was like fifth.
Interesting.
It went from being way number one to like 5 out of 8.
Welcome back to MasterMined. I'm your host, Mark Scrivener, and as always, I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Jeff Skillen. Jeff, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Mark. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for being on the show today with me.
Always.
This is going to be a fun one. Yeah. In this episode, we're joined by Jordan Young with Jordan & Associates Consulting. Jordan, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you on.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, you have a long history with Jeff and Lee, our other co-host, who's not here today. He's over in Europe having vacation time. We gave him a little PTO.
Yeah, so if Lee is in London right now and he's tuning in, Lee, I know you wish you could be here. So Jordan, first of all, we've really been wanting to have you on the show, and it's amazing that you're here. And I just get this deja vu when I'm sitting here with you. But before we go through like a lot of sort of the time machine stuff, which I want to, I'm thinking it's like, okay, there are a few people in the world that can go by their first name, right? Bono, Cher. Who else comes to mind?
Shaq.
Does anybody else come to mind as just like one with a first name only?
Sting.
Who else could be Jordan and Associates other than Jordan? I mean, it's like, you got first name recognition. What do you?
It was based upon the Call Jordan tagline that you and I put together, 11, 12 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, and so go back to when you were preparing for ITCC.
Yeah.
Right. So this was back. So for those of you who are listening to this who don't know kind of the backstory, John Southworth of Southworth and Associates, and then we had Ben Seymour on a previous episode. He has one of the great networking conferences, an East Coast version and a West Coast version called ITCC. So take it away, Jordan.
Yeah. So ITCC is an event for treatment centers, primarily treatment centers. And so back at the time, I was running conferences, and Southworth was a partner of ours. And so I got to attend every one of these ITCC events. And it wasn't like your typical conference where you have a booth and there's presenters. There were presenters, but all of the people in the audience got up and spoke. And John would have a bowl with every company's name and be like, okay, Cumberland Heights, you got 10 minutes, or Jordan, you got 5 minutes, or whatever. And so you would get up and you would talk about your treatment center or your service. And Jeff and I were doing a coaching session in preparation for that. And Jeff said, why don't you come out there and you can use the tagline, Call Jordan. And it was, you need to do this, call Jordan, call Jordan, call Jordan. And I went to that conference. They had it, I think, 3 times a year. And I went every time from probably 2013 or 14 until John passed away in late 17, and I went every time. And so people that were there, it was like probably 2/3 of the people that attended were there every time, or maybe half or so. But they would see me and they'd be like, "Oh, call Jordan, call Jordan, call Jordan." That was my tagline, call Jordan. I had these little squishy bricks made that said "Call Jordan." I had T-shirts made that said "Call Jordan."
We even took the Michael Jordan, the Air Jordan logo, and we put
that was amazing.
And we put a telephone in Jordan's hand.
Yeah, Nike. That didn't happen.
No, that didn't happen. But it was. I mean, I don't know. It was a stroke of brilliance.
I still have a banner that we hung from the ceiling at Moments of Change that said "Call Jordan" with the Airman logo. My wife has no idea what it's about. Yeah. What is this? It's so weird.
Send us a picture. We'll drop that into the show notes.
Yeah.
So people, it's like they believe that it happened.
I'll look for it. Yeah, I have it in my closet.
I love it.
Jordan, what got you into this space? Like I know you went through a personal recovery. Maybe talk about how did that lead you into this space?
Yeah. So and again, thank you guys for letting me be on here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
It's great.
Thrilled to have you.
So, okay, I graduated college in 2005. Went to Belmont University, made good grades, but I didn't have, we'll say, a spotless background because I was in the middle of my alcoholism. And so it was really difficult for me early on after graduating college to get, a big boy job. And went through customer service and mortgage sales, inside sales positions. And I had a friend of mine who was working at a call center for the place that I ended up going and working in. It was literally 500 feet from the building that I worked in. And I told him, whenever you guys are hiring next, let me know, because I would love a chance to work at a company like this that does the type of work that you guys do. And so, well, to sum it up, I lost that job with the transportation company. Whenever they started a new department within their call center, I was the first hire for that department, and got my foot in the door in 2010 and haven't left ever since.
Wow. That's what I know you've worked with Lee as well, just on doing conferences for foundations, and I know you've been involved in a lot of others, but what motivated you to ultimately go on to start Jordan and Associates Consulting?
Wait a second. There's so much that happened between 2010 and Jordan Associates. Okay, I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, it's like give everybody a sense for sort of the professional arc that you had, where it's like you started off on the admission side, but then walk people through kind of the career trajectory that you had before you launched your own thing. And I want to bring that up because eventually we want to offer what that service is available to other people in the industry that want to continue to grow their career. So I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's a good call, Jeff. I'm just going right in for it. So
you're going right
way
for the kill.
Way to bring us all back.
Well, it's a lot of people know Jordan as Jordan today, but it's like, some of us knew Jordan before Jordan became Jordan.
Before Jordan was Jordan.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I started in a very entry-level position in the call center, and I was taking patients that our facilities were not the appropriate fit for. So whether it was their clinical diagnosis, their geographical location, or their financial needs, we weren't the right fit for them. And so I would work with other treatment centers and help them admit into those programs. So I actually, as the first new hire for that department, I had to help build the database. And so I was literally looking in SAMHSA and calling these treatment centers. Do you take this insurance? What is your specialty? Do you do this and this? And so I got to know a lot of treatment centers. I worked with over 4,000 patients and their families when either we weren't the appropriate fit for them or they were resistant to going into treatment. So coordinated interventions. Worked with hundreds of treatment centers around the country. The gentleman that was running the conferences at Foundations at the time, he left to go to a competitor, and so I was promoted to take over our conferences. And that was the beginning of 2013. Our events, there's been like we talk about the moments of change and the conferences, but there's a whole new crop of people that have come up in the industry since then that have no idea what we're talking about.
Right.
So the conferences, we had events in San Diego, California, in West Palm Beach, Florida. We created one. Jeff and I literally sat in a boardroom and created a new one for Nashville. We created one for Dallas, which wasn't as good. But these were events for behavioral health care. So they were for treatment centers, clinicians. They were for companies that service treatment centers. We had, on average, 100 to 150 exhibitors and 1,000 to 1,800 attendee events. And so what I did there was I would help come up with the tracks. I would work on putting together the content and bullet points for the e-blasts and marketing campaigns. I would work with the speakers at times. Sometimes I had to put together their presentations for them. But what I did that was most valuable was I did all of our sales. So any exhibitor or sponsor that came or group attendees, I would work with them on that. So I was like the face of these really big conferences. And over the course of working in the conferences, I made amazing connections. So many connections in the field, and started working with a group of investors around 2015 on opening a treatment center. Didn't work out. Didn't work out with those guys, and pivoted to a different one in a different location. That wasn't going to work out either. We never actually opened. And so I said, okay, this was after we had gone through 2 acquisitions at the company I was at. And, it began to feel a little bit different. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to stay here and see if I can stay here long term. And after a while, I realized, this just isn't where I want to be long term. I think that the things that had made me successful in the roles that I was in took me away from it. The desire to do more and the ambition. And so I started talking to people. I spoke with you, and I spoke with some other folks whose opinion I really valued in the industry. I said, what do you think I should do? Because I can't stay here doing what I'm doing now in the environment that I'm in longer. And so people said, you should go into consulting. I was like, okay, I'll go into consulting. And I actually the first company name that I had was called Jordan Consulting. And then a couple of people said, hey, that doesn't really sound like an adult company name. I said, okay. So I started Jordan and Associates Consulting. This consulting business was owned and ran by a guy who had no idea what a consultant did. I just knew that I knew a ton of people, and my idea was that I was going to be kind of like a contractor. There was someone that was in my office complaining about some things going on in that person's work life, and I thought, I thought in my head, this person is so valuable and provides such an amazing service, but no one knows who this person is. And if I could connect this person to other treatment centers, then that would be of huge value to them. So that was the general concept. Jordan and Associates Consulting, it was like me and 40 plus associates who were contractors who could do anything a treatment center could possibly need. I had a good contact for it because of that Rolodex I developed in the call center and running conferences. Well, that isn't the way the business stayed, and we can, if you want to hop into that now, we can, or we can do that later.
Finish the story, and then we'll kind of jump back in.
Okay, and so as I was promoting Jordan and Associates Consulting, I had a couple of people who I respected a lot, people that were veterans and leaders in the industry, and they said to me, Jordan, okay, I would have a conversation with you because I know you and I like you and I know what type of person you are, but I don't understand what you do. And I'm like, well, I do this and this is I had no clear value proposition. It's like, oh yeah, I can do this or this, and it's what I see with so many people that are doing consulting work or that are providing treatment. They don't want to pick a lane, because they think, well, if I can do all lanes, I can, get paid for doing this or this or this. But really where my business changed was when I picked a lane. And it was more like the lane picked me, because what people kept asking me to do rather than help them with consulting work was help them when they needed to hire or help them when they needed to find jobs. Even though I wasn't saying I do recruiting, I didn't want to do recruiting. They would call me, they would say, well, Jordan, you know everyone. You know anyone who's looking for work in this area or to do this? Or do you know anyone who's looking to hire? And I finally caved in the summer of 2019 after about 10, 11 months of trying to do consulting work on my own. And I started recruiting for one company and then for another, and then I was pretty good at it. And I was able to open the door to candidates that weren't accessible to treatment centers on their own. And that's all that I do now.
Yeah. How did you kind of know how to price it all out in the early days?
Oh, no.
Or did you just go, hey, I think it's going to be, X, and you?
No. So it's funny. I sent over my initial contract to this first client of mine, and the way that came about was a friend of mine who had advised me. He said, Jordan, you should go into recruiting, because I guess he had a background in recruiting prior to. He said, you know everyone. You need to go into recruiting. I was like, I don't want to do recruiting. I don't know anything about that. And he got promoted to VP of his company and said, I need to hire 5 business development reps this year and 10 next year. I want you to do it for me. I was like, I remember it. I was walking in the exhibit hall in Amelia Island at the CORE conference. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And had a conversation with the head of their HR department. I sent over I made a few revisions to my consulting contract, and she just verbally patted me on top of the head and said, oh, bless your heart, that's not a recruiting contract. And so sent me over some other versions that they had worked on, and I pieced my own together. And as time went by, I had my attorney create one. But no, I mean, my pricing and the way that I did it all evolved. And I've since figured out as I've gone along, just like I did my job in admissions and my job in doing conferences. Funny story, the first conference I ever attended in my life was the first conference I hosted. So, I mean, it was literally 6 or 7 weeks prior to the start of the conference in San Diego that I got the conference job, and I had to, not only did I have to learn how to sell conferences, I had to learn how to do it while selling this conference that was 1/5 full, 6 weeks out. So I had to figure it out as I went along, and that's what I did with recruiting.
Wow. Well, it's great that somebody took an interest in you and they leaned in and gave you advice on how to price stuff at the early days. And it's all about, building relationships is what I've, picked up on.
I mean, so Jordan, how did you get comfortable doing sales? Because a lot of people are nervous about doing sales. And then what role has mentorship played for you along the way?
So I didn't want to do sales. I did sales out of necessity. Like I mentioned, I couldn't get the type of positions that I felt like I should have been able to get, especially with the degree that I had. And so I took customer service and sales jobs, and I didn't like it. I had a negative view of sales. I thought salespeople were grimy and car salesmen and slimy. And I've done a lot of coaching. I've read a lot of professional development books. I worked with the great Jeff Mad Skillen on coaching whenever I was first promoted to take over the conferences. Jeff and I would spend hours together in the boardroom. And I mean, I would be saying this if I weren't on your podcast. Great service there. And what I had to realize is that sales, we're selling people all the time. And I can offer a service to someone without pitching something that's not of value to them. It's for sales, I'm never going to hop into my sales pitch until I get to know my audience and get to know that the solution or the product that I have for them is the right fit for them. If you have salespeople or you have recruiters, people working for you that have never told a prospect, hey, you probably don't need to move forward with me, then you have the wrong people. Everyone is not a prospect. Everyone is not the ideal prospect for your service, and that's okay. That's okay. You have to get to know them, and you have to get to know what about what you can offer to them will be of value to that individual. And I feel like that mind shift is what made me successful because I would put in the work. I worked in inside sales roles where I was dialing for dollars, and I just didn't feel good about it. And when I had that mind shift that, okay, I need to look at these people as individuals and not as a potential sale, then I got a lot better at it.
Yeah. Wow. What's the like? How would you describe today, like your like core mission at Jordan Associates? And maybe even take it back to how has your history influenced that?
Core mission. So it's recruiting work, but what I'm so grateful for is that I'm in the position now where I can be selective on who I work with, and I can be selective on the types of positions that I work on. I remember back maybe a year into recruiting, the first time I was able to fire a client, fire a treatment center that I was working with. They needed me to do a lot of work. It was this company that the owners and I, we didn't share the same moral compass. We'll say that. And I knew that there were a bunch of jobs that they needed me to help them with, but I just didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel good about the people that I would be sending employees to go work under. And I fired them, and I let them go, and I was so relieved. I felt so good. And so today I'm able to be selective on not just, the company, not just the name of the organization, but the actual people that are the leaders of the organizations that you're going to work underneath and you're going to work alongside these candidates. So that feels really good. And also that I've been working, when I started, I would work on anything I could, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, you need this job. Yeah, you need a pencil sharpener, someone to do that. Yeah, I'll do that for you, right? I don't think that position exists, but but you get the gist. But now I'm working on a lot more leadership positions, and what I like about that is I'm able to connect people that are not just good at their job, but people that I believe are good people that are gonna not just steer a company in the right direction from the standpoint of a bigger dollar sign, but people that are gonna steer people in the direction to make them better as individuals and make their life better. Not just the patients that you serve, but also the employees that are working there. So I feel good about being able to place good people with good organizations. And I feel like, long term for our industry, I feel like that's good.
So that's sort of the employer side, which I mean, super important. Let's talk about the employee side in terms of, you helping to, create a good situation where like you get to know people and just say, wow, this person is kind of a diamond in the rough, or this person is amazing. I know the perfect place to go. Let's talk a little bit about who do you serve on that side? So it's like, can individuals reach out to you, Jordan, and say, I'm looking for this, and who ideally can you help with that?
Yeah. So the best way to do that is to email me a resume, because I have a database of thousands and thousands of candidates, and it could be the perfect candidate, perfect, great candidate. But if we don't have a position for them, we don't have a position for them. But I do have a database where I'll put their resume on file and make some notes, and whenever something pops up that I think may be a fit, then I'll reach out to them at that time. But going back to your question, who are ideal candidates? Is that what it was? I'm sorry.
Ideally. So it's like, I think people understand that a recruiter generally works for an employer, but what about the people who are looking to either advance in their careers, or how do they get in on the tip of what jobs are open?
Yeah, I think reaching out to someone like myself, and there are other recruiting agencies, some of which are good, some of which, like I'm not the only person that's good at recruiting in our industry. So I would say reach out to people to see, realistically what positions they could be a fit for. Because I know when I speak with candidates, I'll give them an assessment. At the end, I say, okay, I mean, I'm not giving them like a questionnaire, but I'll say, all right, here's what I think. I think that you have this in your advantage. You have this up against you. You have this going for you, and you have this up against you. Because I'll shoot them straight. Because ultimately, they're my client too.
Yeah.
They're my client, because I've had many people that have worked with me on the candidate side who ended up not being placed in the position that they were applying for, but they came back to me because they had such a positive experience and they brought me on to hire for them in their organizations. So, I mean, and Jeff, my business is built upon my reputation.
Right.
And so I'm not gonna ghost someone. Not responding to someone, even if their potential employer is not going to move forward with them, that's not acceptable. Mm-hmm. That's and I get story after story from people that say that that's what they encounter. I say, well, you're going to hear back from me regardless. Whether it's what you want to hear me say or not, you're going to hear back from me regardless, because there's an amount of professional courtesy that as a business owner or a business, I feel you need to have. And so I think that looking at recruiting agencies and looking at organizations to say, okay, realistically, could I be a fit for this type of position?
Just to build on what Jeff asked too, I mean, you gave us an example of a company that you fired, a program that your values didn't align with. I'm sure it's happened with candidates before too. Like, what are those common things that you see in candidates that you go, man, I don't think there's any way I can help you out?
I think when people are unrealistic about where they are in relation to their peers that may be vying for the same positions, people that are unwilling or unable to stay at an organization for over 6 months. We did a survey. So I do surveys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about some data, Jordan.
Okay, so the background for surveys, as someone who does recruiting work, you would imagine most of the people that reach out to me are unhappy with their current position or their
Let's put a resilient spin on that. They're looking for a better opportunity.
Yeah. But the genesis of my first survey was, okay, how widespread is this unsatisfaction that I'm getting in candidates?
Okay.
So I literally did a survey on employee satisfaction, and 1,200 people completed it from within behavioral health care. Yeah, this was like 2 or 3 years ago. And I thought, okay, well, we'll do another one. Did one on company culture. We had over 800 people complete that. We did one on, it was a general healthcare and employment survey. And anyhow, the most recent one that we did was called Who's Hiring Who? So we had 25 hiring managers that have hired someone for a leadership position within the last 12 months, and 25 candidates who had accepted a leadership position within behavioral health within the last 12 months. So the questions essentially mirror one another. Mm-hmm. So on the front end, I interviewed the 25 hiring managers that had hired leadership positions. The first thing is a poorly written resume. And so what I tell candidates all the time is the most perfectly written resume will never get you a job, but a poorly written resume will keep you from ever having the chance to interview for one. So it's like, make sure that your resume, make sure it's good enough, right? And make sure it represents the type of person that this organization is after. So look at the position. Look at the position that you're, as a candidate, look at the position that you're going to be applying for, and look to your resume and your experience and see, okay, what about my experience can I highlight? I'm not in any way saying fabricate anything or enhance something.
Embellish or enhance.
Yeah. But also highlight the things in your background and your experience that would make you a fit for that particular position. Because if you're hiring someone to be a sales representative and all of their experience is that they highlight is on all the operations things that they did, then
Right.
It's not, you're not going to get a chance to sell yourself in the interview process. So that's what I would say first of all when looking for opportunities and submitting your resume. But one of the two biggest disqualifiers that I heard from hiring managers outside of being late to interviews, and these both were over 60% each.
Wow.
People said that disqualifiers during the interview were general or vague responses. So not specifically stating when asked a question that, like, this is what I would do and this is how I would do it. Just kind of breezing over that. And then also speaking negatively about your past employer or your past employees. So go high and be specific.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What would you say the state of the hiring market is right now?
There are jobs out there. I mean, there are jobs out there. What I get a lot of, what people reach out to me most often for on the candidate side, they're looking for growth potential and they're looking for opportunities with organizations that they can feel secure in. Whether their current organization has just acquired new facilities and they're doing layoffs there, or they're maybe a better way to frame that is if they are struggling and laying off their current staff, or they have new leadership in place, with companies that are selling every 3 to 5 years, and there's a change in leadership, and like, okay, well, we want to bring our team in and we're going to do things differently. So really looking for places where they can feel secure and where they can grow. So going back to those surveys, the one that we did on employee satisfaction, so we asked people what determined their current satisfaction level in their current position. So the highest response rate was compensation. So 57% of people said compensation was what determined their satisfaction with their current position. But the overwhelming response for what would make people seek a new opportunity was advancement opportunities. So that was 76%, and compensation was like fifth.
Interesting.
It went from being way number one to like 5 out of 8. Yeah.
So what advice do you give to candidates that are looking for an opportunity to advance, or maybe they've been in an organization, they've been there longer than they think they should be in that same position, and they're just not moving up? What advice do you give them?
So I was speaking with a candidate a few weeks ago, and I asked his permission to use this. He said we were talking about his current position and this opportunity that I was calling him about. And, it was a good position that the person had. It was a good position that I was offering this guy. And he said, Jordan, the grass is brown on both sides. It's there are warts and there are struggles with any type of organization. No organization is perfect. And so what I would encourage people to do before their frustration takes them out of an organization is to look at what the pros are with that organization. And those are things that they may be taking for granted now, which aren't necessarily going to be there at another organization. I think that there are companies that have, great story, okay? So there's a particular organization that back when I used to do a lot of business development hiring, and I still do some, but it's more leadership stuff. But they would say, we want people from this organization because they're like the Green Berets of business development. And outside of that organization, though, they didn't have a great reputation, okay? But also, they were impossible to recruit from because of the way that they treated their employees. They paid them well, they trained them well, and their management team allowed them to do the things that made them successful. On the opposite end, there was a company that I know well that's a member of this. They hold themselves in very high regard, we'll say, and they were very easy to recruit from because I know that they don't pay well. I know that their employees, they're kind of stuck within the organization. And so what I would tell employees is just look at where you're at, look at what's good about your position before being consumed by the negative, or I could be over here making more money, or I could be here and have this or this or this. Like, okay, maybe. But also there are some negative things about that company and what you would be going through with them. So before you jump in right now, let's pause.
Yeah, that's and I mean that's great advice. And I think a lot of times people would assume that a recruiter is going to talk them out, like they're on the ledge, and instead of trying to get them to stay like you do because of the integrity you have, you're going to try to get them to tip over so you can, represent them with another, program. And so this is great advice and a great way to, I think, run your business. So what do you, we talked a little bit about advancement, and I guess, what do you see today as like some of the common traits that people have that consistently get advanced through organizations?
So it's it's not a situation in behavioral health now where there's a prerequisite where you have to be in recovery to work in this field. I remember I had somebody that made it all the way to a final interview, and they asked this gentleman, said, "Why should we hire you?" And the person's response was, "Well, because I'm in recovery." And I was debriefing with the hiring manager after. He's like, "Oh, that was the worst answer you could have given."
Yeah, I agree with that.
So kind of going back to like what I pointed out with the resume, is look at the position and look at the company and look what are the fundamental characteristics that are going to make someone successful in this role and with this organization. And so if you're looking to get into behavioral health care, look at your skill set. I am good at building rapport. I am good at listening and communicating, and I'm very smart in relation to technology, but don't ever say I'm a quick learner. That's my pet peeve is when people say, "Oh, no, I don't know that, but I'm a quick learner." Like, so you don't know.
Yeah, I feel like I need to qualify when I agree with you that's really a terrible answer. But let me qualify why I think it's a terrible answer. It's you should have all of these professional qualities and you should have all of this stuff going for you, and you happen to be in recovery. It's like if you discover that, that's a nice to have.
Yeah.
And it's like, but not a prerequisite. Yeah. And so, like, Mark, we were just having this conversation the other day. It's like, when I was in the music industry, one of the terms that just drove me crazy was female rocker. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was like, either you can rock or you can't.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what gender you are.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like the mere fact that they actually led, I was just like, no. So this is a perfect example of like, you need to actually lead with what you're capable of doing. And then those other attributes happen to be, along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how many doctors have you hired because like, well, I was going to go with Jim over here, but I'm going to go with Becky because she had heart surgery herself. And so I'm going to, since she's a former heart surgery patient, I'm going to go to her.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Jordan, like just for the executives that listen to the show, is there a common area of a program that you see the most turnover with today that you're getting called in for? And maybe like help them understand, like, what is it culturally that maybe they're doing that could, that's causing that?
Oh, that's a great question. So most turnover by far, business development. Okay. Business development by far. And like I said, I still do some business development hiring, but not as much. I do more leadership stuff, but I hired a bunch of business development people early on in recruiting. And every time almost what people would tell me is I need someone with the book of business, with the book of business, right? And what I will always stop people when they say that to me and tell them, say, okay, but you realize that book of business that you're referencing, that's just a book of contacts that they created when they were working somewhere else. And those contacts may have referred to them when they worked somewhere else. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to refer to you or to them at your program. it especially doesn't mean that they're going to refer to this new program within the first 30, 60, or 90 days. And so if an organization doesn't have the ability to train people or have the patience to give them time to ramp up their production, then it's not going to be a fit for me, because for me to work with them, because essentially you're just setting them up for failure. You're setting the individual up for failure. They're setting the organization up for failure. You're wasting their time. You're going to waste my time because I'm going to have to replace that candidate as well. And it's a bad situation for everyone involved. So if their expectations aren't realistic on what production should look like, then I won't work with them. And that's where I see the most turnover. And so I would say to organizations, be realistic. Know that in your outside sales and your business development roles, it's going to take time to produce. It's not like you're a therapist. Like, I've been doing therapy over here, so I'm just going to go over here and do therapy. I'm going to have all the patients and everything, and no one's going to know any different. Mm-hmm. Like it's sales. It's different.
Yeah, sales is the hardest position, no matter what industry. And I mean, even in this space, I mean, if you're starting a program out and you're looking for a business development person, it's always smart to hire two. And the reason is because, salespeople are great at selling themselves, mm-hmm. but they may not be great at actually selling what you do and building those relationships of trust that it takes in this industry too. And one of the two, hopefully both of them, kill it, and they do great, and it's not a non-issue. But what I normally see is one flames out because they were just a great salesperson to get in there. And it happens pretty quickly. And even though you spend a little bit more up front, you save a lot more, over the life of that person. And
Totally agree.
Yeah. So what do you, I guess, we're getting ready to probably wrap up. And I guess with that, I know I've got another couple questions, but Jeff, I don't want to cut it short. I know you may have something too.
You sit at a really interesting nexus where it's you do have a lot of connections of people who make hiring decisions and the people who are looking to be hired, right? So, I mean, from that vantage point, where do you see things right now? Not just in terms of, you said there are jobs out there, right? But it's you've also been through a number of cycles in the industry. Mm-hmm. So where are we in 2026?
I think we're going to see, from an M&A standpoint, it looks like we're going to have more activity this year.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And with that, becomes more turnover, more opportunities, and probably if capital becomes available more easily, then more new treatment centers. So more new opportunities.
So if you're a job seeker, are you optimistic?
Yeah. I feel like I'm just an optimistic person in general, though, right?
Yeah.
So take that for what it's worth. But I feel like I would always be optimistic because there's always going to be turnover. There will always be turnover. Whether it's one of our surveys that we did, it was a healthcare employment survey, and so we surveyed people in behavioral health, general healthcare, long-term care, and what we found was within the last 12 months, 39% of people had accepted a new position. So you think about that. Nearly 40% of the market turns over. Mm-hmm. And a huge chunk of those stayed within the industry and went to other positions, but some of them left altogether. So there's going to, those 40% of jobs, those are going to be open, and then those will be replaced in bulk by people within the industry, but also some of the people are going away. They're leaving the industry. And you think about the cycle, I guess, your career arc in terms of being an employee. Mm-hmm. Things are going to happen. You're going to exit the workforce at one day, whether it's because you retire, you die, you go do something else. So there will always be more and more opportunities. And with behavioral health care, I feel like what we've been for so long is an under-professionalized profession.
Yep. That's where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I mean, to pick up on that topic, you've mentioned a couple times that organizations that do well train well, right? But there's this part of it of like, you can't expect an organization to think, what does Jordan need? It's like, so what should individuals do to continually be getting better themselves? How do they get more professional? How do they become, the person that everybody wants to be around, wants to employ?
Yeah. So I can just speak personally for me, like I mentioned earlier. When I got into sales positions, I wasn't very good. And I'm better today than I've ever been before, but I'm not as good as I'm going to be tomorrow because I'm going to be a continued learner. And that comes from resources that were provided to me by companies, so sales trainings that I went through with them, but also reading and courses that I elected to do on my own. The training with skill set, that was amazing. That was great. And so I think for employees, it's continue to invest in yourself. Whether the company is going to do it or not. Like that's great if the company will do it, but also you have to take the onus to do it yourself if you really want to develop yourself. Yeah,
it's when you gave the example of the person who looked at two opportunities that the grass is brown on both sides. My first thought is like, do you feel like you're green yourself? I mean, do you feel like you've invested enough in yourself? As opposed to looking at these two things and picking and choosing, it's like, what have I done to actually pour into myself? And that's where I see people continue to fall short, expecting an external circumstance to make them better, as opposed to an internal motivation to become better.
Yeah. I mean, it's continuing to strive and be better at what you do and looking at, okay, this is where I'm at today, and this is the position I'm in today, but this is where I want to get to. Okay, what do I need to do to get there?
It's amazing to me how few people actually think about this in terms of a plan.
Yeah.
It's like, here I am today, and I'm going to be realistic about where I am today. I'm not going to be here tomorrow because at X point in the future, I want to be over here.
Yeah.
Sometimes they need help navigating that roadmap, and that could be somebody like you. That could be a mentor that they seek out. I'm just curious, is like, do you see people doing that, or is that kind of just, wishing into the wind?
There are some people that do that, yeah. And it's funny you talk about the roadmap. What I tell companies that as far as retention goes of their staff, what they need to do is they need to give them a compass. So the compass to let them know the general direction that the company is going. And then they need a map to tell them where they're at, where they need to be, and they need a guide that can take them from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And if someone's organization doesn't have a guide for them, then they need to look externally, whether it's hiring an external coach, whether it's reading sales or self-help, or and this isn't all sales, right? Like this happens in other positions.
Oh, absolutely.
This is what I keep going back to.
I'm thinking about in terms of building a career.
Yeah, I mean, looking at where you're at today versus where you want to be. Like, okay, well then, incrementally, what are the steps that I can take to get from here to there? And whether it's reading, whether it's going to seminars or investing in a coach. Mm-hmm. What do you need to learn, and what do you need to overcome about your personal behaviors or your professional downfalls that are holding you back from that?
Yeah. Jordan, I got a couple last questions for you. One's easy, but what do you see as, like, we've talked about turnover, and I'm sure, like, some of the programs that have high turnover, they may not align with your mission, but I don't know that, but what is a healthy turnover you see today in a program?
Oh, honestly, I couldn't even tell you that for.
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned that 36 to 40% that was just turning over in the industry. It's like, should you expect that within an organization, or
that seems high to me?
Well, that's what I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what I would think.
I would think that if it's above 25%. Then and I don't have the data to back me up other than that survey that I did where it said 39%. But for me, if I was replacing over a quarter of my employees every year, that would be a red flag for me. And there was an organization that so John Southworth, talking about Southworth, something that he said to me years ago. So John was the interventionist and mentor of a mentor of mine. What he talked about was that he would judge the places that he would refer to. He would decide if he would refer to them or not based upon how their bananas looked. And I said, What do you mean, John? He said, well, if they have brown and spotted bananas, that means they're not really caring for their employees. But if they have fresh fruit and fresh bananas, that means they care about what they're offering to their employees, and they're going to serve their patients better, which in turn means they're going to get better results. I said, okay, John. Well, that makes sense. And so I think for organizations, they need to be doing things like surveys. They need, and even if they don't follow through with everything that the employees wish for, they need to let them know, okay, we've heard you, and this is what we heard you say, and here's how we can make changes, or here's what we can do along those lines. We can't do this that you wanted, and maybe here's why. So one of the things that I talk about so much is communication. You have to communicate with your staff. They have to have a direct line of communication with their manager so that if they're struggling or they can share in their successes or whatever it is, there has to be open communication, because without that, people are going to feel isolated. They're going to feel unvalued. They're going to feel unwanted, and then they're going to look for other opportunities.
Jordan, I bet you that the next survey could be surveying all the programs out there that you have a relationship with and asking them about the turnover. Mm-hmm. And then what are the common things you're hearing? And then what can they do in 2026 to reduce that turnover? Could be a great next survey for you, but
you may be seeing that.
Yeah.
That is a very good idea.
I can see something that you're going to publish that the three things that employers need to hear but don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Something along those lines based on that survey.
Yeah. One of the last surveys the one I did before this little mini one was measured satisfaction among employees, or how they thought their organization and how they thought the industry, their current view of it, whether it's positive or negative, and what their future outlook for the organization and the industry was. And so we measured that based upon the type of organization that they worked at. So whether it was nonprofit, for-profit, PE-owned, 5+, and then what generation they belonged to. Measuring that, people in the baby boom generation versus Gen Y, and how they viewed stuff like that.
We didn't even get a chance to talk about the generational situation, which I would love to. So maybe we have you back to talk about the intergenerational situation, because our industry covers all the generations.
But that survey, Mark, that came from a suggestion from a friend of mine. We were at a conference. Said, it'd be really interesting. Do you have any data on the younger generation, on how quickly they feel like they need to be promoted? Because with my younger employees, that's what I'm hearing. I said, you know what? No, but I can create a survey that encompasses that, and so that's one of the things that we measured too.
Yeah, Jordan, as we wrap up, is there anything maybe that we didn't ask you that you think the audience would need to know, or anything
that you want to share?
Yeah.
No,
we covered a ton.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yeah.
So would you come back for a second episode?
I would come back for a second, third, fourth, fifth.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Because I would love to dig into the generational situation. There's some other topics that I've got in mind, but this has been great, Jordan.
Oh yeah. This is fun. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being a part of it. And that's a wrap for today's episode. On behalf of Jeff and I and the entire MasterMined team, thank you for tuning in today. If today's conversation with Jordan sparked any interest around recruiting and hiring and culture building in your programs, please reach out, leave a comment or a question in our comment section, and we'll get it over to Jordan and get it answered for you. And until next time, we'll see you next week on MasterMined. Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of MasterMined. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, MasterMined is not just a podcast, it's a community. So don't forget to comment, subscribe, and review us. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content that's relevant and relatable. Thanks again to our sponsor, Snapshot, a digital media marketing agency. And thank you for joining us on MasterMined, your behavioral health playbook.